Hi, this is David Farkas with Red Dot Forum. Today, we're going to talk about rangefinder focusing on the Leica M, how it works, some common mistakes to avoid, and some of my favorite techniques. So stick around. The Leica M is somewhat unique. When you look through the optical rangefinder of a Leica M camera, you're not actually looking through the lens like you would on a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Here, everything is sharp, rather than on, say, a mirrorless camera where only your point of focus is sharp. So we have to use a different technique. Inside the viewfinder, you'll see a small window, which we call the rangefinder focusing patch. There's a ghost image that's projected using the rangefinder window right here into your main viewfinder. When you turn the lens, that activates a focus cam, which in turn moves the rangefinder, and that ghost image slides side to side. So when we get our distance dialed in for our subject, the ghost image and the regular image align, and when they're perfectly sharp, your subject is in focus. Let's run through some tips to help you master the rangefinder focusing technique. Okay, this is an easy one, but one that trips up even experienced Leica M shooters. It's keeping your viewfinder and your rangefinder focusing windows clean. See, what'll happen is, if you take your finger in its natural resting place, instead of on the shutter, a lot of people end up holding the camera like this, or like this. And what that'll do is put fingerprints both on your rangefinder window and on your viewfinder window. What'll happen is, if you have any kind of smudges or fingerprints, it drops the contrast in the viewfinder and specifically the rangefinder patch significantly. It really makes focusing really hard, and you don't even realize it's happening. So what you should do is make sure to carry a microfiber lens cloth in your pocket, which you should have for your lenses anyway, and give the viewfinder and rangefinder windows a good clean. It's going to make things so much easier and your shots much more consistent. Hyperfocal distance is a technique whereby we're selecting a focus point on the lens that's maximizing depth of field through infinity. It's going to be impacted by two factors. The first is your focal length. The wider the lens, the more depth of field you have. The longer the lens, the less depth of field you have. Likewise, your aperture. If you're using a small aperture, which is a higher number, you'll have more depth of field than a wider aperture or a smaller number. Now, this is not permission to shoot at f/16. As I've said so many times in the past, friends do not let friends shoot at f/16. Okay? With modern digital sensors, like the one here in the M11, we have very small pixels because we have a high pixel density. And the smaller the pixels are, the less you can stop down for depth of field before hitting diffraction, essentially blurring your image. So on an M11, I like to kind of keep my maximum to f/8 and 5.6 if I can help it. What that means is you're probably going to have to use a wider lens for this technique. On longer lenses like the 50mm, hyperfocal isn't very effective. You'll notice here that the scale is far more compressed, meaning that we're getting very little depth of field, even if we stop the lens all the way down, which you shouldn't do. At f/8 hyperfocal distance, we're looking at maybe 6 meters to infinity at best case scenario. This really isn't your best option for using for hyperfocal. Now, if we look at a 21mm though, now we're talking. Because look how broad and wide that depth of field scale is now on the 21. This makes it so much more usable for this application. If I dial hyperfocal distance here and put f/8 to the infinity mark, right there, I can see I've got depth of field going from infinity all the way down to less than a meter. What that means is effectively you don't need to focus at all. All you have to do is concentrate on your composition and your timing, and everything will be sharp. This is fantastic both for landscape photography as well as for street photos. So zone focusing is a variation of hyperfocal, although technically speaking, hyperfocal is a type of zone focusing. The main difference is that hyperfocal maximizes depth of field up to and including infinity, whereas zone focusing is really concentrating just on a specific range of focus. So let's take a look at our 21 because this is going to be the easiest to explain. Let's say that I want to maximize for close focus. In this case, instead of putting the infinity mark on the far side of the lens at f8 here, I'm going to move this over and instead reposition the close focus mark of 0.7 meters to f8 on this side of the lens. And then you'll see the corresponding depth of field is going to carry through to about 2.5 meters. This is going to give us tons of focus in our foreground, falling off with no focus in middle distances or at infinity, which is going to be totally fine. If you wanted to maximize for middle distances, again, all you have to do is adjust accordingly so you can find your distance. I moved it over now 1 meter to infinities in focus again because it's a 21. So even though our zone is from 1 meter to infinity, well, because of the depth of field of a 21, it is hyperfocal. So there's going to be some overlap there, but if you're using a lens that's a little wider, say like a 28, you'll actually be able to delineate a little more in your close focusing zone, your mid zone, and infinity. A really important aspect of rangefinder photography is picking the right subject or the right part of the subject to focus on in the viewfinder. Right? Because those are sliding sideways with that ghost image, you want to find a distinctive subject, one that can easily identify when it's sharp or not. Now with some things it's going to be pretty easy. For instance, if you're shooting a portrait, generally speaking you're going to go for the eyes, and that's going to be relatively easy to see when that eye is sharp or not. If you're photographing a building or a landscape, you can pretty much see, along the edge of the building or the shape of a mountain. Those are going to be relatively easy. Where we run into some trouble with notoriously difficult subjects, like the surface of water, or a really tight pattern like a fence, or a repeating pattern, or even something, let's say, a wall with no detail whatsoever. In those cases, what you'll want to do is find an object or a piece of that on the same plane of focus that you can really get better focus on. Something especially with a vertical line or a distinctive feature. So if we're going to photograph, say, a wall over here that is a repeating pattern, let's look for the window which stands out, focus on that window frame, and then readjust our composition where we want it in the first place. One of the most important things to master for rangefinder photography is estimating distances. If you practice this and you really master and really understand how to estimate distances, you are going to be amazed at how much easier rangefinder photography really becomes and how quick it can be. Now, certain distances are easier to estimate than others, and I bet anybody can estimate infinity. On M lenses, they max out at, say, on this one, this 35, 7 meters and then jumps immediately to infinity. Some lenses are 10 meters, some are 6 meters, but basically, you're always going to have that jump because the focusing scale is logarithmic and not linear. So if something is further than, say, 10 meters away from you, you can be pretty confident that it's going to fall in that infinity range on an M lens. So if we take our building over there that is far off in the distance, all I have to do is pre-focus to infinity, take a shot, and I know it's going to be sharp. Now, conversely, the other one that's going to be pretty easy is close focus, and I have a trick for that. Because M rangefinder lenses have a minimum distance of 0.7 meters, certainly modern ones. Some are maybe 1 meter, but most of the modern lenses are 0.7 meters. If we dial to 0.7 meters, how do you know what distance that is? Well, for me, my trick is this. If I can reach out and put my hand on someone's shoulder, or just put my hand out there to the end of my fingertips, I know that from my eye, where I put the camera up, to the end of my hand is 0.7 meters, or thereabouts. So that's a really good way to estimate that. And I think most people, because we're aware of our surroundings and we're around people a lot, you kind of know where that range is at arm's length. So use that to estimate minimum distance. So now we've got minimum, we've got maximum distance. The hardest one, though, for most people to master is those middle distances, everywhere between in the middle of that range. Because is it 8 feet away, 10 feet away, 12 feet away? it's really hard for most people to accurately judge those distances. So here's the trick. Practice. Here's a handy drill. Wherever you are and you're not seriously taking photos, whether you're at home or your office, sitting in a cafe, or just out for a walk here, pick an object. Let's say we're going to use our clock here and estimate the distance. So let's say that that is, I don't know, 12 feet away or somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 meters. We dial it in. Before you ever lift it up to your eye, put it up to your eye and see, is the rangefinder patch aligned or not? And if it's not, tweak the focus ever so slightly until it does line up, and now look at the distance on your lens. And that way you'll be able to train your eye both to pre-estimate, and then once you start correcting yourself, you'll learn what those distances are. So kind of keep a mental tally of that. Practice this, practice it, because it's going to make your photography that much easier, especially when we combine it with our next tip. Now, on an M lens, as we discussed, we have a minimum distance of 0.7 meters, rangefinder coupled, to infinity. And you notice that distance isn't that great on the lens. You'll also notice on a lens like this, I have a focusing tab. And what you'll want to do is learn where that focus position is relative to where the tab is. So you can think like the hands of a clock. So at the 6 o'clock position, on this lens, I'm at about 1.3, 1.4 meters. If I pull all the way this way, I'm at minimum distance. If I push the tab all the way to the other side, I'm at infinity. Now I can get a feel for that without actually putting the camera to my eye or even looking at the focus scale. So what you want to do is, if I know, let's say, that I'm going to shoot a picture at minimum focus distance, all I have to do is pull that tab over to minimum distance before I ever lift it to my eye. Now I can step in, get close to my subject, lift the camera to my eye, and we should be really close to focus, and you can tweak from there. Likewise, if I'm shooting something at infinity, I can rack the lens to the other side, right to infinity, lift it to my eye, take a shot without even having to focus. And in our middle distances, like we just covered, what you'll want to do is learn not just your estimating distances, but also where those distances fall relative to the focus tab. So now I can get a real feel, just standing here, as I practice and combine that skill of estimating distance with learning the focus tab position. That really unlocks the true power of the rangefinder, because you're able to dial in your focus 90% before you ever lift it up to your face. What I see a lot is I'll see users put the camera to their eye and then turn the lens frantically from side to side trying to find focus. And to me, this is a little bit strange, because if you know your subject is at 2 meters or 6 feet away, why are you going everywhere for 0.7 meters to infinity repeatedly, back and forth and back and forth? It's kind of a waste of time. Definitely use the pre-focusing technique, knowing where the tab is, knowing where your subject is, and putting those pieces together. And we're going to combine that with one more technique after this, which is going to pull all those pieces together and really bring your photography to the next level. So when you're first getting started, probably the easiest way is, once you are in that general 90% focus, is to just use the focus tab and put your eye up to the viewfinder and get that position of the rangefinder image and your viewfinder image aligned. Now, a more advanced technique, especially as you're getting closer in, and this is probably my favorite technique for shooting portraits, but also detail shots, whether it's walking around a market or in an artisan studio or whatever, and I want to get some really detail shots with a longer lens like a 90, I use this all the time. And what that's going to entail is pre-focusing. So again, let's use our example of that portrait. I'm going to go to 0.7 meters. I'm going to step into my subject. I'm going to get that distance estimated in my mind. And when I pull the camera up to my eye, instead of tweaking the focus using the tab, I'm going to use my body, and I'm going to lean in and out ever so slightly like this, and watch that viewfinder image, because as it's aligned, that's when it's perfect, and I'm going to take the shot. What that looks like in practice. Let's say I find a subject. I'm going to dial that in, again, at my waist before I ever lift the camera to my face. I'm going to have that conversation. Can I take your portrait? And I'm going to lean in, lift the camera to my eye ever so slightly, and then take the shot. So it makes that interaction much more fluid, much more natural, and a lot less awkward than if I have a camera in someone's face and I'm focusing like this, because it's going to break that moment and that connection. So very often, you just want to make sure that you can do that as quickly as possible. And what's nice about a rangefinder is that it is a more intimate experience. It's nobody likes to have a big camera shoved in their face. That's what's great about the M. But if you're gonna take too much time to focus and tweak, it can still lead to an awkward interaction. So again, put this all together. Figure out that distance. Dial it in on the tab, and then use your body just to fine-tune and get it perfectly sharp. Hopefully you found these rangefinder focusing tips useful. I'd encourage you to practice for yourself and master these techniques. Once you do, focusing will be second nature, and that'll allow you to concentrate on all the other areas of your photography. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. As always, go to red.forum.com for the latest Leica news, reviews, technical articles, and more. Until then, we'll see you in the next video.